Right, Shandor, I think that's all set. Oh, and happy birthday.
What? It is my birthday again?
No, not quite. It's our 50th guest episode. So I thought I'd pop to the Society of Genealogists in London because they're running the All About That Place event with the Society of One Place Studies, the British Association for Local History, and Genealogy Stories.
You taking your microphone with you?
Yeah, thought I'd go and do something a bit different. I've got people to meet.
Okay.
Speaking of which, here we go.
Almost right.
Hello, and welcome to the Family Histories podcast, the show for and about those of us who are sat quietly in libraries, archives, and spare rooms all around the world, tirelessly piecing together our collective social and family history. My name is Andrew Martin. I'm a family historian, and I'll be your host. In this episode, The Place, we're collaborating with the Society of Genealogists and the All About That Place event to bring you this special 50th episode where we'll be talking to not one, but 3 guests. We'll hear about Victorian crime, an informal fostering mystery, and a bigamy brick wall in Brixton. So, put down those old deeds, grab a cuppa, and let's meet our guests. Ouch! Oh, what? Oh, I can't move.
What's that noise? Where's it coming from?
Hello?
Hello, who's that?
Can you get me out of here, please?
Andrew, what are you doing in the closed rolling stacks?
Oh, Elsa Churchill. Hello again. Well, it was not quite the place I intended. A slight miscalculation, really. I was aiming for the Society's reception.
Well, you've missed it by a few metres. Again.
Again?
Well, you did get me to 1960s Creto Terra in Cyprus, but inside a goat shed.
A goat shed? Oh, did I? Are you sure?
Yes.
Oh, well, that's, Oh, was that the time? Oh, I must go. See you later. Ah, here you are. My guest for this part of the show is a historian and author who focuses on historical crime, police detectives, and the history of forensic science, having written about Detective Jerome Caminada, the murder of PC Nicholas Koch, and the dreadful baby farmer Amelia Dyer, and the dastardly Maria and Frederick Manning. So, before she takes law into her own hands and grabs this microphone, I should introduce my guest, Dr. Angela Buckley. Hello, Angela. Welcome to the Family Histories podcast.
Thank you. I'm absolutely delighted to be your guest.
It's a pleasure to speak to you.
I'll try not to commit any crimes.
No, please don't. But, I normally start with the same question. But for you, my first question is, what was it that first attracted you to crime?
Well, it's a very good question. And in fact, it was my family history. So it's the perfect question for your show.
Oh, okay.
So I'm from Rochester, some people may know, and I grew up in the city. And it was when I was researching my roots in my home city that I discovered that many of my ancestors, who were all poor, had broken the law. And one in particular attracted my attention.
Okay.
And this was my 3 times great-grandfather, who was called John Dawson. And he was a Victorian wheeler and dealer.
Right.
And on the 1861 census, it said that he was a seller of coal and beer. And then the enumerator had written in tiny spidery writing over the entry on the census, keeps a house of infamous notoriety. And unfortunately, he was a brothel keeper. And that's what attracted me into crime history.
Wow. Okay. Well, that's quite a find to have in your family history. And that's quite a difference from what had originally been written on the census return.
Yes, and it was quite surprising because after the names of all the family members, including my 2 times great-grandfather, who was a child at the time, there were 5 young women listed on the census. Mm-hmm. And in the occupation section, it actually had prostitution written, which is very, very unusual. Normally they'd use factory worker or laundress or something like that.
So when you're searching for your culprits or officers that you have been using to turn into your range of books. What kind of records and archives are you using for those?
Mostly using local archives because I'm very much inspired by location, which is why I'm looking forward to contributing to the All About That Place series of lectures. Because for me, location is absolutely key. So for most of my archival work, I do go to Kew, to the National Archives in Kew quite a lot, but I tend to go to the local archives. So Manchester. For my PhD, I went to Manchester, Liverpool and Birmingham. And then obviously my books on Manchester, I researched in the city. And my most recent book, I researched here in Bermondsey.
And what would you say is probably the biggest challenge for you when you're doing this research?
Well, the biggest challenge is you don't really know what's going to be there. So, and if there's even going to be anything there, apart from the fact that the handwriting can be quite difficult on these old records, it's a needle in a haystack. So particularly for my PhD research, I was going through boxes and boxes of court records, mostly at the National Archives, having no real idea of what I was going to find and whether I was going to find anything, particularly useful. I did actually find lots of useful information, and it was a real treasure trove. But until you actually go and search through, you've absolutely no idea whether you're going to find anything at all.
And do you feel almost like a kind of a sleuth yourself with following these crimes? Do you walk in the criminal's steps, or in Jerome Caminada's case, do you walk in his police inspector, detective steps?
Absolutely. I perhaps should have been a detective. I walk in the steps of the Victorian detectives.
Okay.
I love finding out about them. I love following the clues as they would have followed them and piecing together the cases in the way that they would have done, and working out how they found out things, what techniques they used, and how they arrived at their conclusion. Of course, if at all they did, because sometimes crimes remained unsolved. But yes, I like to follow their trail if I can.
And have you ever thought maybe they didn't quite get it right?
Absolutely. More than once, I would say. And certainly with Caminada, I mean, there were some quite extraordinary moments where, his most famous case was called the Manchester Cab Mystery. And he managed to, apart from the fact he used his knowledge of chemicals to solve it, he managed to produce a key eyewitness between the hearing and the trial, who'd never cropped up before, who'd actually seen the perpetrator putting a vial of some sort of liquid into the victim's drink, and who died of chloral poisoning. So, yes, whether that was really an eyewitness is impossible to know. So, yes, sometimes it's very tricky.
Having researched all these things, what led you to becoming an author?
Well, when I was researching my family history in Manchester and I came across the brothel keeper, his brothel, or his house of ill repute, shall we say, was on the beat of the young constable Jerome Caminada. And also the other half of my family is Italian. So Caminada was of Italian heritage and they would have known each other. It was a very close community. So it was really through that I started to write articles. And then later I was invited to write his biography. And so one thing just led to another, really.
And do you have a favourite fictional detective?
I do. Probably Inspector Bucket from Charles Dickens' Bleak House. So he's actually based on a detective called Detective Charlie Field, who features in my book, The Bermondsey Murder. And so he's probably one of my favourite detectives, because he's just so beautifully described. Apart from that, I love Hercule Poirot is probably, in terms of actual detectives, long-standing detectives.
Do you have any advice for people who find a criminal ancestor? Maybe there's a reference to them. What's a good kind of path to follow in finding what they've done and what happens to them?
Well, that's a great question. And it's something I'm going to address on my talk, Murder in the Neighbourhood, on All About the Place, because I'm going to offer some tips and handy advice for looking for murder, in your ancestor's locality. So really, if you come across an ancestor, there's a big paper trail that you can follow, because particularly if it's Victorian, because very much the Victorians were classified as soon as they went into the criminal justice system. So it's very easy generally to find out information. You start off with a calendar of prisoners or the criminal registers, which are usually on the main genealogical websites. And then you can follow the trail through to the point where that you can go to Kew and see the trial records, or you can see if the local courts, you can go to local archives. So you can follow the paper trail all the way through. And I'd also advise fleshing that out with things like newspaper articles, because they described most offences in great graphic detail. So it's very easy to find information, far easier to find information about the past than it is about the present. There's plenty of information in the Victorian newspapers. And you can then use family history. So I also use family history to look at my perpetrators and find out more about them, maybe find out what the motive might be for the crime. And I also use family history to look at victims, because I do think it's really important to find the victims' voices in all this. And you can also find some really interesting biographical information about them too.
Yeah, I have found a few criminal ancestors or relatives in my tree, but I've always been jealous of those who can look at I think it's the prison register books where you've got the photographs.
Yeah.
And, you get to see their hands and they all look very solemnly at the camera and you see some real characters in there. Yes. Were you able to find any of those in your research as well? Were you lucky to find those?
Not for my own personal family history, no. I didn't find I found a good description of the brothel keeper, but I didn't find any photographs, sadly. But I did find photographs of other cases that I study, and it is always interesting. I always enjoy the criminal registers, the habitual criminal registers, for the detail that you get, and also the photographs when you can come across them.
So what's next? Have we got another book in the pipework?
Well, the Bermondsey Murder's only just out,
Yep.
So I'm mostly promoting that at the moment, and then looking for other projects, for the next year or so. So I've got a few ideas, but nothing's quite landed yet.
Well, we'll look out for the Bermondsey Murder book. And thank you, Angela. But I think it's time for me to find my next guest.
Thank you very much.
As we research our family history, we inevitably uncover some fascinating twists and turns, the stories of ordinary people living extraordinary lives. And joining us to share one of the life stories they've uncovered is genealogist, author, medievalist and broadcaster, whose television work on and off screen includes The House Detectives, Hidden House History, and of course, Who Do You Think You Are? It's Dr. Nick Barratt. Hello, Nick. Welcome to the Family Histories podcast.
Thank you very much for having me on. It's a great pleasure.
You're welcome. I'm very excited to talk to you. So, Nick, we're talking about life stories here. So who are you going to introduce us to?
I'm going to introduce you to my grandmother, Erica Doreen Fuller, as she was born, Erica Doreen Miller, as she's known to us after her marriage, because she represents the ultimate brick wall in that she was born overseas. She was illegitimate, and we had no idea of either parent, and she would never talk to us about her backstory. So that was the challenge.
Oh, okay.
And having spent many decades now researching other people's families' histories, I've always talked about brick walls, barriers, things that we can never get down. And I've always thought that my grandmother was the perfect example of the ultimate brick wall.
Definitely. I mean, you've got no clues there whatsoever. Was there not even a country at all that there was like an inkling?
We roughly knew she was born in Belgium.
Ah, okay.
And at the outbreak of the First World War, she was brought over to Norfolk, of all places, and placed in the care of, I hesitate to call them a foster family. It's an older lady who used to run a children's home.
Right.
And one of her former charges, described as companion, who then looked after her during her childhood until she went to boarding school in St Ives in Cambridgeshire.
Okay.
So genuinely, having looked at births in Belgium using her name and found nothing, we thought it was going to be impossible to crack this brick wall because of those factors: overseas birth, illegitimacy, fostering before formal adoption was certified and registered. Where'd you go from there?
Oh, wow. Well, where did you start?
Well, it just goes to show that you need to be really creative, but also never give up. Because during the First World War centenary commemorations, an academic project in Britain set out to transcribe as many baptism records of Belgian nationals from Belgian records as possible so they could trace refugees coming across. Mm-hmm. And through this work, they did pick up the baptism of my grandmother. Nowhere near where we thought she had been born. On her passport it said Antwerp, but actually it was a tiny little coastal place called Nock, which was beginning to become a bit of an avant-garde place before the war came along. Yeah. And it transpires that her mother had gone there to give birth to my grandmother. So for the first time we had a transcript naming both parents and the witness to the birth. Now, her mother's name was known to us because in her personal effects and possessions, she died in 2008, we found various diaries and bits and pieces of correspondence that this name was connected to. And of course, there were some photographs as well. Okay. But she'd always been described as a godmother, rather than a mother. But at least that confirmed that she was someone connected to us, and we were able to research her family story. She ended up going to the States and died there in 1936, and we don't know quite how much my grandmother knew about the connection. But the father was a really interesting character, and he turned out to be an American known as Harry Victor Fuller, who had left his home in the States. He had been based in Minneapolis and travelled onto the continent in 1909, where we believed he met my great-grandmother.
Yeah.
And after a brief affair, my grandmother was the result, before moving on to China, of all places, to take up a post as a lecturer in Tianjin University, acquiring a wife along the way. So really complicated. With further research, we got his backstory all the way to the Mayflower and found some relatives that we never knew existed, and did a little bit of work with them and did our DNA comparisons, and that's when we found out we were not related at all. So he was a fictional character.
Oh, okay.
So we were back to square one. One of those, again, brick walls that you're often confronted with. But with DNA, we were able to identify a very close match, and again, through a process of investigation, DNA, and a little bit of connecting with family members, we were able to ascertain the true family. So we eventually got there, but it took several years of work, all sorts of research techniques, and like I said, that determination to carry on, because you never know when new data sets are going to come along, when new techniques are going to be useful, such as DNA. And some of the photographic matches we're able to use, again, it showed a fairly good connection between the two families. So, yeah, it was a really interesting piece of research, as well as being able to finally identify who my grandmother's parents were.
Wow, that does sound like it would have been quite a challenge. I'm certainly aware that there were a lot of Belgian people coming over to the UK, because I've seen them in photographs and in records within Littleport, which is a village in Cambridgeshire, not too far away from the border with Norfolk. So I've definitely seen them there, and groups of them there during the First World War period and a little bit afterwards. So for them to be in that part of the world seems like it was fairly common, but to be able to get yours beyond this informal fostering is quite an achievement.
Well, that's the challenging bit, because she wasn't Belgian, although in the 1921 census, where she appears in all places in Kent, nowhere that we even knew she had any connection to.
Right.
It claims that her parents were Belgian, that they were both dead, that she was a Belgian national in the UK for purposes of her education, all of it completely fictitious. And again, you can't help but wonder what sort of impact that had on her.
Yeah.
But the choice of Norfolk and the choice of these two characters is something I'm still yet to crack. But we've got pictures, we think, of the day that she had come over from Belgium in the company of another American, a wonderful chap, who was again connected with the family and seems to be a friend of my grandmother's mother. And this is the moment where we have a picture of her being held in her mother's arms and then handed over to these two ladies to then whisk her off to Norfolk. We've got no idea why they chose Manor Farmhouse in East Beckham, which is a remote place. We've got no idea how they were selected.
Okay.
So there's still some work to do about the mystery of Manor Farmhouse. Why this building? What are the connections? And a lot of the research I've done on that is about traditional house history as much as traditional family history. So again, one of those lessons is always combine your methodologies and think around corners, and have a look at the house and see whether that leads you anywhere. So there's a bit of work that's ongoing, and I'll be talking about that in All About That Place. That'll be my featured episode.
Well, as expected, sage advice there. And thank you, Nick, for telling us the life story of Erica Doreen Fuller, later Miller. But I think it's time for me to find my next guest.
Fantastic.
Hello. Are you Christine Payne?
Yes, hi, Andrew.
It's lovely to meet you. So, what are you in for?
I'm trying to break through a brick wall.
You mean?
The brick wall.
Yes.
Well, a problem shared is a problem halved, I think they say. And maybe just one of the listeners might be able to help you with a research clue or idea. So, how can we help?
Right. Well, my brick wall is all around my paternal great-grandfather, Joseph Quinn, who was born in 1840.
Okay.
He was born in Manchester. His father was a tailor, and that was a profession that he followed. He remained in Manchester for 1851 and 61,
Okay.
and then starts to appear in London, Kensington area around about the 1860s. And it's in 1864 that he marries his wife, Susan Lomax. So my brick wall starts to appear after 1871, when his last child, Mary, was born to him and his wife, Susan.
Right. Okay.
There's a slight gap, and then in 1876, he marries my great-grandmother, Martha Sarah Turner, in St Martin's in the Fields in Covent Gardens. Totally unbeknown to me that he had ever been married before.
Yeah. Okay.
So when I picked my family tree up, my great-grandmother marrying him, slightly older man, came as no surprise. I suppose the first time I started to realise something a little bit strange about this marriage was that from between 1876 and 1881, no children.
Yeah. Okay.
Quite a big gap for those times. Certainly there was no children, and also there was no burials for that family.
Okay.
So the gap is always a bit of a mystery. It was always told to us that he was a travelling chap. He'd apparently gone to Australia and Africa as a younger man, and there were stories of his wanderings.
Okay. Which would explain perhaps the gap between the marriage and the children.
That's what's making me begin to think, and maybe the fact that he married again without his first wife passing away was why he sort of felt maybe he should hot-foot it out of the country for a little while.
Oh.
Is a possibility.
Oh dear.
I have never found any passenger lists of him, certainly not leaving the country and definitely not coming back in. So there's a gap that he could have been travelling for all of those reasons.
Right.
When he returns in 1881, he seems to continue through the censuses up to 1891 anyway, where his 5 children are born, and one of those was my grandmother. So he was living in Brixton.
South London, yep.
Family stories often thought, because of the big drapery stores, Quinn and Axton's in Brixton, they thought he must have worked for them. Never any evidence of that, but certainly he was a tailor, might have worked for them, who knows. However, come 1897, there is a newspaper report of Joseph walking into Brixton prison and declaring himself a bigamist.
Oh.
Shock horror. Where did that come from?
I bet, yeah.
Absolutely unknown to any family stories, any family history of anything like this happening. So why did he walk in there, of course, is the mystery to us. Mm. But beyond that, what I have never, ever found has been his death certificate. And usually when we all start our trees, we do our birth, marriage, death.
Yeah.
His death never, ever did appear. And to this day, I still cannot find that death.
I think it's probably safe to say that he has died by now. But
I think we can be quite confident about that one. Yeah. So, well, obviously, why did he walk into Brixton prison? Was he being threatened? Had a wife found out? Are there tales of any mysterious tales there?
Blackmail, maybe?
Yes, exactly. Or once he'd done his 4 days hard labour, did he disappear in the Thames somewhere? But that would be really, really pushing it. We really have no idea at all. What I'm really hoping for, is to just have found him in the workhouse records. The suspicion is he could have gone abroad. He could have gone at that time to Australia. He was 61. It seems unlikely that he wouldn't have been able to have afforded a passenger fare, but he was a good tailor, so he might have been able to work a passage. So we consider that as a possibility. I've never been successful in finding any passenger. I mean, the passenger records going out aren't particularly good, but by that time they're reasonably good of the passenger list coming in.
Yeah, that's true.
But no Joseph Quinn that I can find of the right age, if he was telling us his correct age.
Oh my goodness, okay.
Certainly, I found a birth for him in 1840, so I'm thinking he's early 60s.
Wow. I would imagine maybe if you've said that a newspaper got hold of this story, that maybe both of his families rejected him.
Quite likely. It's very interesting with family stories that never had there been any mention of any other half-siblings. Never any mention, I don't suppose it was a tea time conversation about...
No. Covered up if they in fact knew at all.
Yeah, I think it was well covered. So we have no idea. And my grandmother had half-siblings and interestingly living not very far away, we're talking miles away, that these two families would have been brought up side by side. They wouldn't have gone to school, the age gap between the two families would have been different.
Okay.
And they were going to school by the 1890s. But I would love to find that death certificate. It could be that it's in another country. It could be he went to Australia then. Back to Ireland. His Irish roots go back a long, long way, though. All the way back to probably 1810, 20s.
Yeah, so where did Joseph Quinn go? Does he ever have any name variants? Is it Quinn, Quin, or is it Quinn, or is there an E involved? Or
That's the only variable. So when he's with his first wife, anything written does seem to be with just the one N. And then later on, his second family seemed to have added another N.
Okay.
So he's always Joseph Quinn.
Okay, not much of a disguise.
Not great, is it? It's not. But that's probably just because of how they spelt it. The other important thing to note, though, of course, the Quinn and Axton's drapery store, which everybody, I think, wanted him to have had that connection to, definitely had the one N. Whether that was important to that family, I don't know.
So we're looking to find out what happens to Joseph Quinn after his confession to bigamy. What's the best way for listeners to make contact with you if they think that they have a research clue or an idea?
Well, certainly email's fine. I'm happy to give my email address, which is Christine Payne, spelt Payne, 02 @gmail.com.
That's great. And of course, listeners can head over to familyhistoriespodcast.com where they'll find this episode's show notes and hopefully we'll be able to find some answers for you. In the meantime, though, do you know what?
No, you're going to tell me, Andrew. What?
Well, I think I might be able to help you with this, but you'll need to follow me through to a secret little room in the basement behind a revolving bookcase.
Really?
Yep, I'll show you. Come on. Right, now if I just slide this book back and... got it. Here we are, my secret time machine. Come on in.
Wow. I didn't know the Society had one of these.
To be honest, neither do they. Nor this room as it happens. I popped back here in time and got the builder to add it, and, well, here we are. Call it a sort of footnote to house history. I smuggled the parts in here on previous visits as well. I'm sure they won't miss that chair.
Does it work?
Yeah, it's surprisingly comfy. Oh, You meant this, didn't you? Well, this might be small and sort of portable, but it's very scientific and utilises the latest in AI and an old car battery from a Volvo estate.
And this?
No, that's just a toaster for when I get hungry reading those scrolls from the archive. Now, if you'd like to take a seat, I need to give you this temporal beacon. Keep that with you at all times and just press the button on the top when you're ready to come back.
Okay, I've got it.
Excellent. Now, Christine, what date and which place do you think would give you your best chance to solve your brick wall for yourself? Kind of as history happens.
I'd like to go to Brixton Prison on Saturday the 17th of July, 1897, and I would like to see why Joseph Quinn has walked himself into that prison.
Ah, yes, right. Well, you get to watch him squirm, I guess. But there we go, all set. Okay, here we go. Christine Payne, thank you, goodbye, and good luck. Ooh, a bit smoky. Spot on. Oh, test successful. Thank goodness for that. Oh,
Andrew,
Elsa,
what are you doing?
I can explain. The Family Histories podcast was presented and produced by me, Andrew Martin. My guests were the brilliant Dr. Angela Buckley, Dr. Nick Barratt, and Christine Payne, with Elsa Churchill and John Spike as Shandor Paterfi. Thank you for listening, and we'll be back soon with Series 8. Approximately no family historians were harmed in the making of this podcast.